This is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM. And we have with us at WZRD via Zoom our very special guest, Illinois Court Justice, Joy V Cunningham. And we also have with us a wizard in training in the studio, so he might jump in with some questions. Hello, Justice Cunningham. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm fine today. How are you?
Good. Thank you. First of all, Justice Cunningham, could you tell us a little bit about how you became interested in law? Because initially, you were a nurse.
That's correct. And I went to college at a very young age. So I would say that I ended up being a nurse almost inadvertently. That was not necessarily my calling, but as I say to many people, being a nurse was training for life because it has really helped me in my position as a lawyer and as a judge, and I'll tell you how later. But I became a nurse early in life, and then when I decided to really pursue my calling, I decided to go to law school, and it wasn't a particular point in time. It was more of an evolution. Over time, I began to look at what I wanted to do, and it became clear to me that being a lawyer was my calling.
Was there some injustices that you saw? What inspired you? I know that you said evolve. Could you give us a little insight about the stages of that evolution?
Well, I believe that lawyers are the cornerstone of many things that were important to me. I grew up in an era when civil rights and rights of people who didn't, voiceless people, so to speak. Lawyers are the voices of people who cannot speak for themselves. If you look at most of the social progressive steps that we've made, the civil rights steps, reproductive rights, all of those things were brought about by lawyers who essentially took the issues of the people they represented to the courts and let the courts help those people realize their true rights. So I think I was just encouraged because I felt I could do a lot more being a lawyer than being a nurse.
Well, you were in the you were like in the critical care unit as well. So was it that maybe some of the maybe you were in care of some gunshot victims? Was there anything in that inspired you to think that you might be able to accomplish more working in law rather than as a critical care nurse?
Yes. Being a nurse teaches you lots of things. It teaches you to listen. It teaches you to have empathy. It teaches you how to care for people when they're at their most vulnerable. And it really does teach you to look at life as something precious and something that is a gift, so to speak. And those are all qualities that I think every judge should have. So when I say being a nurse in many respects taught me the qualities that I think makes for a good judge, that's what I mean.
Mm-hmm. When you started at law school, what law school and what was your specialty? Which law specialty did you have?
I am a proud graduate of John Marshall Law School, which is now University of Illinois at Chicago, but at that time it was called John Marshall. And I worked as a nurse all during law school. I worked nights, Saturdays and Sundays, Fridays and Saturdays, occasionally Sundays, as a critical care nurse to put myself through law school. And again, I found that experience was very useful and meaningful to me because my legal education was something that was really precious, and I was working hard to make sure I could pay for it. So I worked and paid as I went along. And in the end, that was better for me because when I graduated from law school, I didn't have a really big debt like some of my classmates because I paid as
Right.
I went along.
Yeah, that's is all your school debt paid off by now?
For sure, yes.
Yeah, awesome. Uh, so first of all, you became a lawyer, and then what kind of law did you specialize in?
Okay, when I was a senior in law school, I worked for the Attorney General's office as it's an extern where the Supreme Court Rule 711 allows you to practice under the supervision of a lawyer. So I worked in their civil division there when I was a senior, and when I graduated, they offered me a job. And so I was very pleased to start my legal career as an assistant attorney general of the state of Illinois in the civil division, where I was the first woman and the first person of color in that division. And I worked there for a year. And at the end of that year, Justice Glenn Johnson, who was then one of the first people of color, first Black men to be on the Illinois Appellate Court, he offered me a job as his law clerk. And I was very happy to get that job. Getting a job as a law clerk is a wonderful opportunity for a young lawyer.
Yes. Who was AG at that time?
Neil Hartigan.
Ah, okay. And then, so you became a lawyer. You practiced at St. Francis Hospital too, or Northwestern Hospital?
No, when I became a nurse, when I was a nurse, I
Yes.
worked at St. Francis in
Yes.
Evanston. They had a big surgical heart program there, and because I was a critical care nurse, I worked in their surgical heart unit at nights actually for 3 years. And my Northwestern opportunity came much later.
You were like a general counsel for was it the university or was it for, I can't remember right now.
For the healthcare operations, Northwestern University and Northwestern Healthcare are two separate entities. They work together, but they're not the same corporation. They're two separate entities, and many people in the public confuse them because they work so closely together. I was the general counsel for the healthcare operations, which is the hospital, the foundation. They own an insurance company, a procurement company. It has 7 corporations in their corporate entity. And I was the general counsel for that corporate structure.
So when did you move on to and decided that you wanted to be a judge? Was there anything between working at the Northwestern and then jumping into running for judge?
Well, we missed a lot before I went to Northwestern. After I left my judicial clerkship, I was recruited by a law firm, a mid-sized boutique civil litigation firm where I worked for a number of years. I was a civil litigator. Again, I was the first person of color that they hired, one of the first women. And I tried a lot of cases. I did trial work, and that's where I really learned to be a lawyer. And what I said about being a nurse was very helpful to me because my firm did mainly medical malpractice defense, and we defended wrongful death claims and so on. So I had a leg up in terms of reading medical records, knowing what questions to ask when you're taking a deposition. So I became very useful to the law firm in terms of preparing these cases for trial. And I worked there for a number of years. Then I was recruited to Loyola University to start an in-house litigation department at Loyola. And I took that job, and it was very successful. And I eventually worked my way up to become Associate General Counsel of Loyola University. And at that time, Loyola University and Loyola University Medical Center were all part of the same corporate entity. So I was the Associate General Counsel for the university and the General Counsel for the healthcare operations because I had a lot of healthcare experience. And it was from that job that I left to become a circuit court judge, an associate judge of the circuit court.
So when in-house litigation, is that like defending against any malpractice, or what kind of work was that?
It's when somebody if somebody sued the university, depending on the type of case it was, we tried it ourselves. We defended it ourselves or settled it, or we instead of sending it to an outside lawyer, we handled it ourselves.
Oh, so if there were a case, then you would be working with the plaintiff's attorneys to try to like reach a settlement before even going into the court system.
Absolutely. And that's how I got to meet many of my friends who are plaintiff's lawyers. I met them way back in those days when we had cases opposite each other.
Yes, I've seen when lawyers work together, they're on opposite sides, but they're very civil, and oftentimes they're friends as well.
That's right.
Okay, then you ran for associate judge of the circuit court of Cook County, right?
Yes, I did. And I was selected on the first round. And I didn't realize at the time how unusual that is, because it's a very complicated process. And usually, according to the Constitution, the state constitution, there must be 2 candidates for each spot. So for example, if there are 10 vacancies and there are 20 people running for the 10 vacancies. And so most of the time, if you are seeking one of the vacancies and it's your first time in the process, you almost never get selected. You go a second time and then maybe you're selected. I was selected on the my first round, and I was very fortunate. I didn't realize at the time how fortunate I was, but that's what happened. And so I became a circuit court associate judge.
And who was doing the selecting?
All of the circuit court judges. The way the process works is that you have to go before the Bar Association's evaluation committee. And if you're found qualified, then you go before the committee of presiding judges, who is presided over by the chief judge of the circuit court of Cook County. And they interview everybody, and then they make a selection, and they reduce the list of candidates down to 2 candidates for each vacancy. So sometimes it starts off with maybe 200 people. It's a lot of people. The year I ran, I think it started off with 225 people. And then they reduced it down to the number, to 2 times the number of vacancies. And then once that happens, then they send ballots out to all of the full circuit judges, and they vote on which of those candidates they would like to add to their roster as associate judges.
And you ran, or did somebody nominate you?
Pardon?
Did you ran, or did someone nominate you and then you agreed to run?
No, nobody nominated me, but the then Chief Judge Don O'Connell encouraged me to run, to put my name in the process, because I had tried cases before him and I'd worked with him on many occasions. And I think he was interested in having someone who had experience in civil law, because most of the candidates who seek associate judgeships, they will often come from the public sector, such as the state's attorney's office or the public defender's office or the corporation counsel or the attorney general. But I had spent the majority of my career in the private sector doing civil litigation. And I think he just wanted a variety. So he encouraged me to throw my hat into the ring.
So at that time, you said that after your name is selected, and then there were two of you for that vacancy. Did you and you said that then the first circuit court judges took a vote. And how many voters were there? How many judges were there that were voting?
I don't remember the exact number, but it's somewhere around 300 judges.
Okay, wow. Well, congratulations. And do you still remember the percentage by which you won?
No, you don't get to, you don't know that percentage. The numbers go to the administrative office of the courts, and they count the votes, and they simply tell you you have been selected or you haven't been selected, but you don't get to know the numbers.
Well, then you were working at the circuit court for many years. For how many years?
Well, I was a trial court judge for 4 or 5 years, but then I've been on the appellate court for 16 years.
Okay. And then how did you jump to appellate court?
Well, I came to the appellate court from outside. That's when I went to Northwestern. After I left the circuit court, I became the general counsel, senior vice president and general counsel of Northwestern. And at that time, again, I was the first person of color in a senior management position at Northwestern. And I was there for 7 years. And then I decided that I loved my job, but my son was very young at that time. And I felt that I really, for personal family reasons, I really wanted to have more control over my life and my time. And I loved my job at Northwestern, but it was very consuming. It was an all-consuming job. I traveled a lot, and I had a young child, and I had a very reliable nanny, but I just didn't want to have my son grow up and not having spent the time with him. So I started thinking about what else could I do that would be important to me, allow me to make a contribution, and at the same time use my skills and make a decent living. And a good friend of mine, who was then an appellate court judge, said to me, "Why don't you run for the appellate court?" And that's how it came about. And I decided to run, and I did, and I won.
Oh, congratulations. So you had some very good advice along the way.
Yes.
So what was the time commitment as a appellate court judge versus your work at Northwestern? Do you still remember?
What was it like?
Yeah, the time commitment. Let's say you at Northwestern, you would be working, let's say maybe 12 hours a day. As an appellate court judge, maybe how many hours were you working?
Well,
comparatively, so that you have time for your son.
Well, as an appellate court judge, unlike the trial court, you do have more control over your time. The work is more, but the work allows you the type and context of the work allows you to make your schedule yourself. For example, if you're reading briefs or you're deciding a case, you can do that at any time during the day. I've often found myself reading material and reading briefs at midnight after I'd put my son to bed, or getting up early in the morning at 4 a.m. And so the work is there, but you can reschedule it, and you can schedule it around the things that you are doing in your household. So the flexibility is much greater than in the trial court or when I was at Northwestern.
Right. Yeah, you're more of a night owl than kind of like me.
Yes.
Then so how did that work influence you in the work that you're doing now? For instance, I did see that when right now in the Supreme Court, Illinois Supreme Court, you have meals together with your fellow justices. At the appellate court, that was not the case at all. You were just every judge just had his or her own courtroom court that and the cases that came before that court, right?
Yes. Well, the Supreme Court, the Illinois Supreme Court is very unusual, and it's peculiar in the sense that we're the only court in the Supreme Court in the nation where the justices have apartment suites above the courthouse. So when the court is in term in Springfield and the Constitution spells out when the court shall be in term, when the court's in term, we're in Springfield for 2 weeks. So obviously we need to have some place that we can deliberate and have the opportunity to speak with each other about the cases that we're hearing. And when the courthouse was built back in 1907, that the framers of the courthouse at the time had the foresight to see that and recognize that, gee, all of these justices come from all over the state, and if they're going to be in term for 2 weeks, where are they going to live? Let's make apartments for them above the courthouse. So that's what was done. And each of the apartments, it's like a small 1-bedroom apartment, and each apartment has a name, and they're different suites. And it's interesting, it has a brass plaque on the door, and it tells the names of all the justices that occupied that suite during their tenure on the court. It's very historical.
Yeah, it's almost like the Capitol building, right?
Yes.
Same kind of setup.
But
So
you know, the Supreme Court building is a fabulous building, and it was completely refurbished a few years ago back to period style. So they even use the types of paints that they used when it was first built. It's a building that I think every Illinoisan should see. It's very elegant. In fact, it's my screensaver. If you see
yes,
me
I see it.
sitting in front of it, that's the outside of the building. It is a very majestic building.
Thank you for having that for your screensaver. It's beautiful.
Yes.
And so it is open to visitors?
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
Nice. And when you so it's only for 2 weeks that you and your fellow judges are living together throughout the whole year. It's just that 2 weeks?
No, when the court is in term, it's in term for 2 weeks in January, March, May, September, and November.
Okay, January, March.
So it's in term 5 times a year for 2 weeks each time. But when it's not in term and we are in our home districts, we often meet by Zoom. Occasionally we'll meet in person, but we meet by Zoom because there's a lot of work to be done that can't be done only in those 2 weeks when we meet in Springfield.
Exactly. And you mentioned too before in some other interviews that a great part of your current work as in the Supreme Court is administrative work. So what kind of work is administrative work?
Well, the Supreme Court is the ultimate overseer for the entire judicial branch. We're the third branch of government, and the Supreme Court is the overseer for that branch. Now, Illinois has 102 counties, and there is a courthouse in every one of those counties. And we are responsible for all that goes on in all of those courthouses all across the state. We're also responsible for the pretrial probation department. We're responsible for a number of other initiatives that the Constitution has laid out or that's evolved over time. And so all of that administrative work is done through our administrative office. We have a branch called the AOIC, the Administrative Office of the Illinois Courts, and it's run by a director, a woman by the name of Marcia Meese, who's extremely competent. And we have hundreds of people who work there who take care of all of the things that we need to address as the oversight agency for all of these things throughout the state that are connected to the judicial branch.
So oversight meaning like the expenditures and the record keeping?
Exactly. Yes. It's budget. For example, one of the most important jobs that we have as a Supreme Court justice is to fill vacancies, because you want to keep the judicial branch of government functioning as well as possible. So when there are vacancies throughout the state in, say, the probation department or pretrial services or judicial offices. We have to fill those. And that's done, each justice has their own process, but that's done by an administrative process.
Mm-hmm. When you decided to run, and then I know that you were most interested, you got some advice, and then of course you were immersed in the legal aspect, but on the political side, you still needed like someone to help run your campaign. Did you get advice about how to run a campaign?
Yes and no. I've gotten advice from friends who have run successful campaigns or unsuccessful campaigns. So I do have a lot of friends who are supportive of me and who offered their suggestions as to how I should do things, but I also follow my own intuition.
And you were slated by the Cook County Democrats, right?
Yes, I was, and I was very grateful for that because the slating process, I think, is very rigorous, and it does, it gives the candidates an opportunity to tell the public who they are and what they bring to the table and why the committeemen should select that person, in this case, that's me, to be the standard bearer for the Democratic Party for this position. And so it's a great opportunity, I think, to tell people, the public, the committeemen, the party, this is who I am, and this is what I bring to the table, and this is why I deserve your support.
Were there a lot of interviews, such as with whom during the interview process?
Well, there are 80 committeemen, 80 Democratic committeemen in Cook County, and this is a county-wide election. So I tried to meet with as many of those committeemen as I could prior to the slating process. And they all have their own method of interviewing. Some of them do it by committee in their ward. Some do it one-on-one. Some did it by Zoom. Some did it in person. So it was a complete potpourri of different kinds of interviews and presenting my credentials. But yes, I did that multiple times.
And so when you ran, you were still working as a judge, right? And then how did you find time to run?
You mean now, when I'm running now? I am on the Illinois Supreme Court now, and I am campaigning. Yes.
Right. And well, when you were got on the slate, and then were being interviewed by to get on the slate, and at that time, what was your day job?
I was a judge.
Yeah.
I was on the Supreme Court. I've been on the Supreme Court since last year. When I was appointed to replace Burke when she retired. Right,
and she chose you.
Well, the Supreme Court chose me.
She suggested
she made a recommendation.
Right. Okay, so you got on the Cook County slate. So this is for this election. What about the previous election for the appellate court? Did you have to get on a slate at that time as well?
No, I was not slated. I was an independent candidate. I ran without the support of, I was not a slated candidate. I ran on my own.
Oh, so there was somebody else that they slated, and you won over the person that was slated?
Yes.
Well, congratulations for that.
Thank you.
Oh, wow. Okay. Let's see. And let's put it this way: do you enjoy politics and running for office, or is it just something that you have to do?
Well, I don't think of judges as being politicians. I think the process of being elected certainly looks like politics, but it really isn't. and it shouldn't be considered political, although it looks like politics, because judges really should not be politicians. I think judges should remain above the fray, so to speak, so that you're not approaching your office with a political mindset. And so I do this process of campaigning and seeking my office because that's what our Illinois Constitution says is the necessary means of getting elected to the Illinois Supreme Court. But I do believe that judges should not be politicians, and that we are not politicians, and we should do everything we can to make sure that the public doesn't see us as politicians.
I think that maybe some of the other candidates are might think that way too, because when I go to the voting booth and I see that whole list of judges that we have to vote for, it's like about maybe almost like 50 of them, and we really don't know who they are. We just have to rely on some organizations for their recommendations, and that's kind of difficult.
Yes, it is, and it places judges in a very difficult position because you can't really campaign the way a legislative officer can campaign. You can't raise money on your own. You have to, the Constitution prevents you from doing that. So you have to impanel a committee to raise the money for you. And it costs money to advertise and to get yourself out in the public so that the public knows who you are. And unless you're running in a high profile race like I am, people who are running for the circuit court judge, they have a really difficult time getting their information out so that people in the public who really want to know who are all these people whose names are on the ballot, there is very little information that's available. But on the other side of that, I think the public can rely on the bar associations to really look at these candidates, because the bar groups do a very, very good job of really digging into the candidates' backgrounds and just investigating them, reading their opinions, and all of the things that you would expect to be done so that they can make a determination whether or not this person is qualified or not qualified to hold that judicial office. And unfortunately, a lot of the public isn't aware that the bar associations do this, so they don't avail themselves of that information by going to the bar association's websites. And I wish more people would.
Well, I actually had I used to go with the Chicago Bar Association's recommendations. They would send me even in the mail like a listing of whom they recommend, but
Yes.
they haven't done that recently. And then also I have used Injustice Watch too, based on recommendations of friends. Do you have any opinion about Chicago Bar Association recommendations versus Injustice Watch judge recommendations?
Well, I don't know about Injustice Watch. I can't speak about that from personal experience, but I can speak about the Chicago Bar Association from my personal experience, having been reviewed by them many times. And as you probably know, I was president of the Chicago Bar Association many years ago, and I know the process. It's a very rigorous process. And sometimes they speak to over 100 people who have appeared before that judge. I mean, it is a very rigorous process. And as a result, they come up with a good product. I mean, they really have a good sense of who that person is by the time they're done. So I certainly recommend it.
Yeah, well, that makes sense because these attorneys will be appearing before judges for their cases, and they really need someone who is fair, so that at least for justice's sake, they will have a fair hearing.
Yes.
What was memorable about your tenure as a Chicago Bar Association president, and how did that come about?
Well, It came about because I'll start how it came about. I was very active in bar association activities. And the reason why I was active in bar association activities goes way back to the time that I was a law clerk. When I was a law clerk for Justice Glenn Johnson, he required that all of his law clerks join the Chicago Bar Association. And the reason that he required that is because he said when he was a young man, Justice Johnson, incidentally, has passed away now. He was very elderly and passed away. He said when he was a young man, the Chicago Bar Association did not allow people of color to join the organization. So as time went on and they allowed people to join people of color to join the organization, he encouraged everybody to do that because he felt that you could make many more changes from the inside than you could from the outside. So he was a member of the association himself and very respected and was able to make many changes. So he encouraged me to, not encourage, he required his law clerks to join. So I joined. And I can remember when he was telling me that I require you to join the Bar Association. I thought, oh my goodness, I didn't want to do it. I was a young lawyer. I didn't have any money and it cost money to join. And I was like, why do I want to do this? But as time went on, I realized that he was right because being a member of the Bar Association allows young lawyers to come in contact with judges and senior people in the profession that you would never otherwise meet. And I realized, gee, this is a great opportunity. So I did a lot of work on committees and so on. And I just stayed in that process. And eventually I rose to the top.
So they had various committees that studied different issues that were important to the Chicago Bar Association?
Many. The Chicago Bar Association has, oh, I don't know, it's got to be at least 100 committees on different things that lawyers need. So if you if you do real estate law, for example, they have a real estate law committee. If you do civil practice, just doing regular civil practice, they've got a civil practice law committee. If you are a woman lawyer, they have an Alliance for Women that really talks about women's issues and how women can thrive in the law. They have so many committees and commissions and opportunities. And now that continuing education is a requirement in Illinois, the Chicago Bar also offers continuing education credits to their members. So it's kind of one-stop shopping, and it's a good networking opportunity for young lawyers. And that's what kept me involved.
Continuing education, meaning some classes at the Chicago Bar Association to catch up with the new developments in law, or is it the actual paid tuition to attend some courses that are in at universities?
No, all the courses are done by the hosted by the Chicago Bar, but it goes to the Illinois Supreme Court has a requirement that in order to practice law in this state as a lawyer, you have to have 30 hours of continuing education every 2 years. It's a requirement to maintain your law license in Illinois. And they have certain things that you must take. For example, that 30 hours must include an ethics course. And so you get to choose the other things that you want to take to make up your 30 hours, but you must take an ethics course. And the Chicago Bar Association offers courses so that their members have a place to acquire their 30 hours that the Supreme Court says they must have.
Well, Judge Johnson said that you would need to be on the inside of the Chicago Bar Association to make any changes. And then so you were on the inside. Were you able to make any changes? And if so, what were they?
I think that certainly I subscribe to the philosophy that it's easier, that there are, not that it's easier, there are advantages to working from within a system as opposed to from outside the system. And during my tenure as Chicago Bar President, we did many things. That was the year that we had the International Conference of World City Bar Leaders. So we had a conference in Shanghai, China, and I led the delegation from Chicago, and bar associations from around the world met in China, and we talked about and made certain agreements about things that work that are, should I say, consistent or common to all bar associations, and how we can facilitate that. So, for example, if you live in Australia and you work for a big company and you have to come to Chicago to represent your company, how can we make that more, how can we facilitate that for you so that it's easier? So that conference was a very important thing. We also worked on getting the address of the Judicial Privacy Act is something that the Chicago Bar Association, and I co-chaired that committee. The Judicial Privacy Act allows judges to remove their home addresses from public documents because of the privacy threat, and it actually grew out of a very violent situation that happened about over a decade ago, where a federal judge had her mother and her husband murdered in her home by a disgruntled litigant who was able to get her home address from a public source. So all of those were things that grew out of my activities with the Chicago Bar Association. I'm pretty proud of that.
Yeah, that's a lot of work, important work.
Yes.
This is just like a question that has always that I wanted to ask. When you were in law school, did you have any courses about how to speak before a judge, like the public speaking, how to speak efficiently? Were there any courses like that, or do you just work on that on your own and just from experience and just decided how to speak better? Because you speak very well.
Thank you. Well, all law schools have something called moot court, and they also have trial practice.
Right.
And the trial practice courses teach you how to speak in some respects. That's not all it does, but it does teach you how to make a presentation, how to prepare a case, how to prepare witnesses, and that's not that sort of thing. The moot court is like a complete argument in an appellate court. So the students would have an issue, they would argue the issue in front of, and often moot court is done before real judges. I have often judged moot court competitions. So those two things are the things that really give law students an opportunity to see how they will perform in a courtroom. And like anything else, the more you do it, the better you get. So I've been doing this for a very long time. So I'm very comfortable speaking in front of an audience because I've done it for a long time.
Exactly. When you, what was the most memorable for you when you served as Illinois First District Appellate Court Judge?
Well, I recognize that the appellate court is the court of last resort for many, many cases. The last time I checked, I think it was about 96% of all cases that are appealed end at the appellate court. So I recognize the importance of my role as an appellate court judge. When I was first elected to the appellate court, I had a mentor, a former justice who is now passed away, and he said, always remember that you are the last person standing between some poor devil and complete doom. So always do the right thing. And I think about that all the time. So even...
Oops, I think you got muted somehow.
Even if what I am deciding is not popular or politically correct. If I think it's the right thing, I will do it because I realize the importance of an appellate court justice. Most of the cases end at the appellate court. So the appellate court is, in many respects, the most important of the three levels of court system, almost for some people, more important than the Supreme Court, because it's the court of last resort where the case ends. So whatever happens, that's the end of it. So you need to make sure that you really get it right.
Is there any case that made a difference in your approach in serving as a judge while you were working at the appellate court?
No, I don't think so. You know, all of the cases are unique, and they all have something that's peculiar to or unique to that case. I do remember some years ago, a friend who was the director of the Innocence Project at Northwestern's law school called me one day and asked whether I would be willing to meet with one of his clients. And I said, well, tell me a little bit more about it. And he told me that the Innocence Project, as you know, is a project that works to exonerate people who were convicted, who were wrongfully convicted.
Yes.
And this particular person, I did not remember the case at the time, but he said, you you persuaded the other judges to exonerate my client, and he ultimately got a certificate of innocence, which means that a trial court judge found him innocent and that he had not committed that crime. And my friend said this client of his, who was out of prison now, he wanted to meet you because he said that you gave him his life back. And I didn't even remember, I didn't know who that person was, but I said, you know, it made me feel good because it means that I did my job well, even without knowing who was going to be the beneficiary of that down the road. You do every single case the best you can. And I felt at that moment that that's what I had done.
Can you describe a typical workday for you now?
Well, a typical workday is atypical because every day is different. Today, for example, I'm doing this interview, but I had a meeting with my law clerks earlier before I did this. And then when I'm done, I have another meeting with the other judges. We just finished the court term in Springfield, so there are lots of loose ends that we're tying up. So I have that to do, and I'm working on the cases that we heard last week in Springfield. So I'll be in my office having meetings or working on cases today. But every day isn't like that, but that's what today is going to be like.
Well, you mentioned earlier, thank you for that. You mentioned earlier that you were an independent that ran against the slate. Have you any idea how you as an independent was able to win over the slated candidate?
I think it was a lot of different things. I worked really hard. I raised significantly more money than he did because I had spent the majority of my career in the private sector. So I had much more opportunities for fundraising and a committee that was much more in tune with the business community. So I was able to raise significantly more money than he did. So it gave me an opportunity to get my message out. And I worked very hard. And I went to all of the committeemen in the various wards and just worked. And the ones who didn't support me, I sent material to their constituents anyway. And I just worked. So I think it was a combination of hard work and being able to fundraise.
Do you have a professional fundraiser for you, or at some point or other you were involved in fundraising?
No, I did not have a professional fundraiser. I just my friends. And as I said, I couldn't raise the money myself because the law prohibits judicial candidates from
Mhm.
fundraising
Right, it has to
at
be a
any
committee.
time for anything.
Mm.
So I simply had a committee of friends and they worked on fundraising, but fortunately they were people who were business people, physicians, people of means, so to speak. So they had other friends of means and people who would be willing to contribute to the campaign to give me an opportunity to get my message out.
Right. Were you allowed to even speak with the committee, or you had to be, or did you have to be totally off limits in with any fundraising?
Well, I spoke with them to tell them what I needed them to do
Uh-huh.
and, and how much money I wanted them to raise.
Uh-huh.
But
Yeah.
other than that, I couldn't know who had contributed to the campaign or how much or anything like that. But giving the committee instructions and letting them know how the campaign is going, yeah, that was something I could certainly share with them.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So, finally, in what way are you a better candidate for Illinois Supreme Court Justice than your opponent? And how many opponents do you have? Just one, or
I have one, just one opponent.
Yes.
Well, I think the first thing that I can say is that I am already in the seat. The Supreme Court already appointed me and I am occupying the seat and I am doing a good job. So by the time the election rolls around, I will have been on the Supreme Court for almost 2 years. So it seems to me that there ought to be some recognition or some value to having that experience as opposed to upending it and starting from scratch with a new person who may or may not be able to make the grade. We don't know that yet. I have not gone before the bar associations yet, but all of my prior evaluations were highly qualified. That I got top ratings from everyone. And number two, I bring a very diverse practice background that my opponent does not have. I've had a very broad practice background, including administrative work, litigation, being a senior person in a very large conglomerate like Northwestern. I bring a lot of experience to the table that most Supreme Court justices do not have. And I think that that's very important.
You also were, you were recommended by Justice Ann Burke. Did you know her before? Do you know how she came to recommend you over anybody else?
Yes, I had worked with Ann Burke I've been on a number of committees and commissions because I am a people person and I like public service and I volunteer for many things, and Justice Burke has gotten to know me over the years. And the Supreme Court justices had many demands on their time to do lots of different things. And often Ann Burke would send me as a surrogate when I was on the appellate court. She would ask me to fill in for her on many occasions. And I did a good job with it. So she came to rely on me and to see me as somebody who was not only capable, but reliable.
In other words, you're saying that Ann Burke had to appear at a lot of functions or volunteering events, and then when she could not go, she sent you as a surrogate.
Yes, if she had to give a speech to a high school class, for example, or judge a moot court competition, for example, those are the kinds of things she would. She had, I guess, 2 or 3 people who were surrogates, and I was one of them. So she would send me to do the task, and I did a good job, and she was always happy with whatever I did. So I became a person that she could rely on, and she thought that I was very capable.
Well, you are a very busy woman as well. Do you ever need a surrogate to help you?
Well, I have in recent years, but right now I'm still doing a lot of everything myself.
Yes. Well, Justice Joy Cunningham, thank you so much for joining us on WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM today. And thank you so much for your insight and your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it. And thank you very much. Enjoy this wonderful, wonderful weather.
Yeah, it's the best time of year. Thank you so much. Be safe.
Thank
And
you.
continue
Bye.
with the good work. Thank you.